I'm 58 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been living with knowledge that keeps me awake at night. In October of 2009, while hiking alone in the Olympic National Forest, I had a conversation that shouldn't have been possible. A creature stepped out from behind a massive cedar tree, looked directly at me, and spoke in perfect English. It was a Bigfoot, and what it told me about humanity's future has haunted every single day since. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a hydrologist. Before that encounter, I was a man of science, facts, data. I didn't believe in monsters or prophecies or anything I couldn't measure. But I heard what I heard, and I made a choice that day to carry this burden alone, to try to warn people in the only ways I could, to watch the predictions slowly come true. This is the story of an impossible conversation, a terrifying message, and 15 years of trying to make sense of what I was told. October 14th, 2009. I was 43 years old and had been working as a hydrologist for the Washington State Department of Ecology for nearly 20 years. My job was measuring snowpack, tracking watershed health, and monitoring stream flow in the Olympic Peninsula. That particular Wednesday, I was hiking alone to a remote monitoring station near the Hoh River, carrying my equipment in a backpack, expecting nothing more unusual than maybe spotting a black bear or elk. The trail was one I'd walked dozens of times before. The forest was quiet that morning, unusually quiet, and I remember thinking the birds seemed to have disappeared entirely. I had a routine on these solo hikes: check the weather station readings first, then test the stream flow meter, collect water samples, log everything in my field notebook with timestamps and coordinates, numbers, data, measurable reality. That's what I dealt in. That's what made sense to me. I'd been walking for about 45 minutes, and I should have been hearing the sounds I always heard out there. Steller's jays calling, woodpeckers hammering on dead snags, the distant drumming of a ruffed grouse. But there was nothing. Just my boots on the trail and my own breathing. At first, I tried to explain it scientifically. Maybe a predator nearby, a cougar or bear, had spooked everything into silence. That happened sometimes. Or maybe I was just noticing the quiet more than usual. Confirmation bias, focusing on the absence of sound because my mind happened to register it that morning. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in premonitions or bad feelings. I believe in observable phenomena and logical explanations. But my body knew something my brain didn't want to accept. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. My heart rate had increased even though I was walking at my normal pace on familiar terrain. I kept glancing over my shoulder, that primal instinct that something was watching, even though I saw nothing but Douglas firs and sword ferns. I remember feeling annoyed with myself. This was ridiculous. I was a 43-year-old professional with 2 decades of field experience, getting spooked by a quiet forest like some superstitious child. I stopped walking and stood still, listening, really listening. And that's when I heard it. Not the absence of sound, but a presence in that absence, a sense of weight to the silence, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The scientific part of my brain was scrambling for explanations. Atmospheric pressure changes? Some frequency of sound I couldn't consciously hear but was registering subconsciously? I even checked my watch to make sure I wasn't experiencing some kind of medical episode, that my perception of time was normal. Looking back now, I realized that was the last moment I lived in a world where everything made sense, where reality followed predictable rules and my education provided frameworks for understanding. I'd spent my entire adult life measuring things, quantifying them, trusting that data would always reveal truth. I'd built my identity around being someone who dealt in facts, who could look at numbers and understand what they meant. In less than 5 minutes, everything I thought I knew about the world was going to shatter. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me awake at night 15 years later, is that I wasn't wrong about the science. The data, the measurements, the predictions I'd been tracking about watershed collapse, they were all accurate. I just had no idea how I was about to learn exactly how accurate they were or who was going to teach me. The thing that made me stop walking wasn't the sight of it. It was the voice. It came from behind a massive western red cedar, clear as day, speaking English with an accent I couldn't quite place. Marcus Chen. That's what it said. My full name. Not quote one or some grunt. My actual name, pronounced correctly, both syllables crisp and deliberate. I froze mid-step, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. Quote two, the voice continued. Calm and measured. Quote 3. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My first coherent thought was that someone was playing a prank. Some colleague who'd followed me out here, hiding behind the tree with a voice modulator or something. But that made no sense. Nobody knew I was coming to this particular station today. I hadn't told anyone. And even if they had followed me, how would they know I'd been in this job for exactly 17 years? I'd started in 1992, fresh out of grad school. The math was right, I managed to say, and my voice came out higher than I wanted it to. I sounded scared, which I was, but I didn't want to sound it. Show yourself. I will, the voice replied, but I need you to stay calm. I need you to remember that you're a scientist. You observe, you collect data, you draw conclusions based on evidence. There was something about the cadence, the way the words were formed. The accent wasn't British or European or anything I could identify. It was like someone who'd learned English perfectly, but from a place that didn't exist on any map. I was breathing too fast. I could feel the beginning of hyperventilation, that lightheaded disconnect. Part of my brain was screaming at me to run, just turn around and sprint back down the trail. But another part, the part that had spent 2 decades in the field dealing with uncertain situations, kept me rooted. Black bears were more afraid of you than you were of them. Cougars almost never attacked adult humans. Whatever this was, panic would only make it worse. Quote, "But," the voice said. Quote 9. I wanted to say something. I wanted to demand answers or assert some kind of control over the situation, but my throat had closed up. All I could do was stand there, my hand still on the bear spray, my body coiled and ready to bolt, while something behind that massive cedar tree prepared to reveal itself. And the thing that terrified me most in that moment wasn't what I was about to see. It was that the voice had said, "We don't have much time," like it had been waiting for me, like this meeting had been planned, like somehow, impossibly, something in these woods knew exactly who I was and what I did for a living, and had chosen this specific day, this specific moment, to make contact. The world I understood was about to end. I just didn't know it yet. When it stepped out from behind the tree, my brain simply refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that looked almost copper in the filtered sunlight. The face was unlike anything I'd seen in nature documentaries or textbooks. Too human to be ape, too ape-like to be human. But it was the eyes that locked me in place. Dark, intelligent, and filled with something that looked disturbingly like pity. It stood there, perfectly still, watching me process its existence. "I'm not going to hurt you," it said, and its mouth moved when it spoke, forming words with an anatomy that shouldn't have been able to produce human speech. Croyez-vous so? I couldn't move. My hand was still on the bear spray, but I couldn't make my fingers work to pull it free. The scientist in me was cataloging details even as the rest of me was screaming. Bipedal. Massive shoulder width, probably 4 feet across, hands with opposable thumbs proportionally larger than human, but clearly dexterous. The face had a prominent brow ridge, broad flat nose, lips that were thinner than a gorilla's, but fuller than a human's. And those eyes. God. Those eyes were looking at me the way you'd look at a child who didn't understand they were in danger. I heard myself say. The words came out weak, desperate. Quote 14. Quote 15. It replied, and I noticed it didn't contract words the way native English speakers did. Every syllable was deliberate, carefully formed. Your mind is trying to reconcile what you're seeing with what you believe is possible. That's a reasonable response. The way it spoke, the vocabulary, the calm, almost gentle tone. This wasn't some animal that had learned to mimic sounds. This was communication, real, intentional communication. I felt my legs starting to shake. I thought about sitting down, but didn't want to take my eyes off it for even a second. "What are you?" I whispered. "You know what I am," it said. "You've heard the stories. Your species has been telling them for thousands of years. We have many names. I don't particularly care which one you use. Bigfoot, Sasquatch." I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. Blurry photos, questionable footprints, campfire tales. I'd dismissed all of it as folklore and wishful thinking. I was a scientist. I dealt in facts. And the fact was, there was no credible evidence that these creatures existed. Except one was standing 20 feet in front of me, speaking English, watching me with an expression that was definitely, unmistakably pity. "Why do you look at me like that?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. The creature tilted its head slightly. "Like what?" "Like you feel sorry for me." It was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the forest around us. The birds were still silent. The whole world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Because I do feel sorry for you," it said finally. "I feel sorry for all of you. You're so close to understanding, and yet so far from being able to do anything about it. You measure the water, Marcus. You write your reports. You document the decline. But you don't see the pattern. You don't see where it leads." My chest felt tight. "What pattern?" "The end," it said simply. "The same end we've watched happen before. We tried to warn them too. Your predecessors. They didn't listen either." That's when I understood. This wasn't just a creature revealing itself for the sake of revelation. This thing had a message, and somehow I'd been chosen to hear it. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and sprint back down the trail. But I couldn't move. The creature folded its massive frame down into a sitting position, legs crossed like it was settling in for a long conversation. "Your species has approximately 40 years, it said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. 40 years before the watersheds you monitor collapse entirely, before the salmon runs fail permanently, before the forests that produce the oxygen you breathe begin dying faster than they can regenerate." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "I know this is difficult to process," it continued, "the existence of my kind combined with the message I'm delivering, but I need you to understand. We've been watching for a very long time. 40 years. 2009 plus 40 was 2049. I'd be 83 years old. My daughter Emily would be 46. My son would be 43. The same age I was right now, standing in this forest, listening to a creature that shouldn't exist tell me their world was ending. That's not possible, I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. I was standing here talking to a Bigfoot. Possible had already left the building. The models show decline, yes, but collapse? Total collapse? That's apocalyptic thinking. That's not what the data says. The data says exactly that, the creature replied calmly. You've just been trained to present it in ways that won't cause panic, ways that make it seem manageable, solvable with incremental change. But you've seen the trajectory. Marcus, you've run the projections. What happens when snowpack decreases by 40%, 50, 60? What happens when summer stream flows drop below critical thresholds for salmon spawning? I had run those projections. Late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd plug worst-case scenarios into my models just to see what they'd show. And they showed catastrophe. But those were worst-case scenarios, the outer edges of possibility. They weren't supposed to be predictions. How do you know my work? I asked. How do you know what I do? We watch, it said simply. We've been watching your kind for millennia. We see your settlements, your roads, your monitoring stations. We hear your radio transmissions. Some of us have learned your languages. We understand more about your civilization than you might think comfortable. A horrible thought occurred to me. Are there others? Others like you who speak English? Not many anymore, it said. And there was something sad in its voice. We're disappearing too. The same forces destroying your world are destroying ours. The forests we need are shrinking. The salmon we depend on are failing. We're part of the same ecosystem you're measuring. When it collapses, we collapse with it. I found myself sitting down, my legs finally giving out. I just sank to the ground right there on the trail, my backpack still on, my field equipment pressing into my spine. The creature watched me with those patient, knowing eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" "That," it said, "is what I need you to figure out." And that's when I understood the real horror of the situation. This thing wasn't here to save us. It wasn't offering solutions or rescue. It was delivering a diagnosis, the way a doctor tells a patient they have a terminal illness. Here's what's happening. Here's how long you have. What you do with that information is up to you. I was being handed a burden I had no idea how to carry, and I had about 30 seconds to decide whether I was going to accept it or walk away. We talked for 3 hours, 3 impossible hours, sitting on opposite sides of that trail while a creature that shouldn't exist explained things about ecology, climate systems, and watershed collapse that I'd spent my entire career studying. It knew things, specific things. It referenced data I'd collected, papers I'd published in scientific journals, measurements I'd taken from remote stations that weren't public knowledge. "How do you know this?" I finally managed to ask. It tilted its head slightly. "We've been here longer than your cities, longer than your written language. We watch, we listen, we understand your world better than you think." Then it leaned forward slightly. "And we can see what's coming because we've watched it happen before. Just never this fast, never this completely." "What do you mean you've watched it happen before?" I asked. My fear had been gradually replaced by something else. Fascination, maybe, or the desperate need to understand. The creature was quiet for a moment, like it was deciding how much to tell me. "There were civilizations before yours," it said finally, "in this land. Complex societies with cities and agriculture and hierarchies. We watched them rise, we watched them fall, always for the same reasons. They took more from the land than it could give. They didn't listen to the warnings until it was too late." "You're talking about indigenous civilizations," I said, "before European contact." "I'm talking about civilizations before those civilizations," it replied. "Ones your archaeology hasn't found yet, won't find. The evidence was erased by time and forest. But we remember. We pass the stories down." I should have been skeptical. This sounded like ancient alien theory nonsense, the kind of thing I'd roll my eyes at in a documentary. But I was sitting 20 feet from a creature that, according to mainstream science, didn't exist. Having a conversation about hydrological data it shouldn't have access to. Skepticism felt ridiculous, I said. It said without hesitation. Quote 60. My hands went cold. Station 47 was one of my most remote installations. I hiked there maybe 4 times a year. Nobody went to that location except me. And yes, I'd written exactly those words in my field notebook on September 12th. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. It was just a personal note, a reminder to watch that site more carefully, I whispered. It said, quote, 64. The implications crashed over me. These creatures weren't just hiding in the wilderness. They were actively observing us, studying us, reading our research. They were intelligence gathering about human activity and environmental change. They've been doing it for God knows how long. Quote 65. The creature observed. Not a question. A statement. Quote 66. I shot back. Quote 37. It said simply. Quote 68. The sun had moved. We'd been sitting there so long that the shadows had shifted and I was getting cold. My legs were stiff from sitting on the hard ground. I needed to pee. These mundane physical realities felt absurd next to the conversation I was having. But what struck me most was that simple admission. I'm scared too. This thing, this impossible being with knowledge spanning millennia, was afraid, and it had chosen me, of all people, to tell. I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. Probably both. When I finally made it back to my truck that evening, I sat in the driver's seat shaking for 20 minutes before I could even start the engine. I had my recording equipment in my backpack. I could have captured audio. I had a camera. I could have taken a photo. But I'd done neither. The creature had asked me not to, and for some reason I couldn't explain, I'd agreed. It had said, now, driving home in the dark, I started questioning everything. Had it actually happened? Was I having some kind of breakdown? My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. Though I didn't know what I was more afraid of, seeing the creature again or not seeing it, which would mean I'd imagined the whole thing. The rational part of my brain was screaming that I'd experienced some kind of episode, hallucination, stress-induced psychosis. Maybe I'd been exposed to some natural toxin, mushroom spores, or something that caused vivid delusions, but I could still smell it. That's what kept circling back. The creature had a distinct scent, earthy and wild but not unpleasant, like wet forest floor mixed with something else I couldn't identify. That smell had been real. I'd breathed it, and the details, the specific things it had known about my work, about Station 47, about the note I'd written in my field book. How could a hallucination know things I'd never told anyone? When I pulled into my driveway at 7:30, the porch light was on. Karen's car was there. I could see her moving past the kitchen window, probably making dinner. Our normal Wednesday evening. Except nothing about me was normal anymore. I sat in the truck trying to compose myself. I couldn't go inside like this, shaking and pale and obviously rattled. She'd ask questions. She'd want to know what happened. And what could I possibly say? Hi, honey. I spent 3 hours talking to a Bigfoot about environmental collapse and humanity's extinction timeline. How was your day? I grabbed my phone and checked the timestamps on my GPS log. I'd arrived at the trailhead at 8:45 a.m. I'd started back down at 4:30 p.m., 7 hours and 45 minutes. I'd lost track of time so completely that I hadn't even noticed the sun moving across the sky. That wasn't like me. I was meticulous about time, about schedules, about documenting when I arrived and departed from field sites. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my pack and headed for the door. I'd have to lie. There was no other option. I'd tell her the monitoring station had equipment problems, that I'd spent extra time troubleshooting. It was a plausible excuse. It happened sometimes. But as I walked up the front steps, I realized this was just the first lie. The first of what would probably be hundreds, maybe thousands. The creature had said we didn't have much time. That implied this wouldn't be our only conversation, that I'd be keeping this secret for a while, maybe for years. I'd made a choice back there in the forest, and I was only beginning to understand what it was going to cost me. The burden of knowing something I couldn't share, the weight of carrying a warning I couldn't deliver without destroying my credibility. The loneliness of being the only person in my world who knew what was really happening. I opened the front door, and Karen looked up from the stove with a smile. "Hey, you're later than usual. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, and there it was. The first lie. Just equipment issues. Took longer than expected. The next 3 weeks were torture. I went about my normal routine, collecting water samples, filing reports, attending staff meetings, all while my mind churned with what I'd experienced. I started researching obsessively. Late at night, after my wife Karen had gone to bed, I'd be on my laptop reading everything I could find about Bigfoot sightings, reported encounters, alleged vocalizations. None of them mentioned speech. None of them mentioned English. Most were brief sightings, blurry photos, ambiguous sounds. Nothing like what had happened to me. I wondered if I should tell someone, my supervisor, a colleague, Karen. But every time I imagined that conversation, I could see exactly how it would go. The concern in their eyes, the suggestion that maybe I'd been working too hard. I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. I'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of that conversation, trying to remember exact phrases, specific details. I started keeping a notebook under my pillow, and I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning with sudden memories and scribble them down. The way the creature had sat, the deliberate pronunciation of each word, the sadness in its eyes when it talked about previous civilizations falling. Karen noticed. Of course she noticed. We'd been married for 18 years. You can't hide that kind of change from someone who knows you that well. Quote 76, she said one morning, watching me pour my third cup of coffee before 8 a.m. Quote 77, quote 78, I said. Quote 79, quote Sorry. She pressed. She was a high school teacher, practical and direct. She didn't let things slide. Is something wrong with one of your projects? And right then, I almost told her. The words were right there, ready to come out. I met something in the forest. Something impossible. Something that told me we have 40 years left before everything collapses. But I looked at her face, at the genuine concern there, and I couldn't do it. If I told her, one of two things would happen. Either she'd think I was losing my mind and insist I see a doctor, or she'd believe me, and then she'd be carrying this weight too. And why should she have to carry it? Why should I burden her with knowledge that would change how she saw the world forever? Just some concerning data trends, I said instead. Another lie. Nothing concrete yet. I'm probably overthinking it. She studied me for a long moment, and I could see she didn't quite believe me. But she let it go. I said. And that was perhaps the worst lie of all. I started losing weight, 5 pounds in 3 weeks. I'd forget to eat lunch, too distracted by my thoughts. I'd be in the middle of a staff meeting and suddenly realize I had no idea what anyone had been talking about for the last 10 minutes. My colleague Dave asked if I was feeling all right. My supervisor suggested I take a few days off, but I couldn't take time off because somewhere in the back of my mind, I was waiting to see if it would happen again, if the creature would come back. If there would be more information, more warnings, more impossible truths I'd have to carry alone. And the worst part was, I didn't know which terrified me more. The possibility that it would happen again, or the possibility that it wouldn't. That I'd be left with this half-finished revelation, this incomplete warning, for the rest of my life. November 6th, 2009. I was back at the same monitoring station, telling myself I was just doing my job, that I wasn't hoping to see it again. But I was. I'd been thinking about our conversation constantly, about the warnings it had given, about the timeline. 40 years. The creature was waiting near the cedar tree, like it had known I'd come back. Quote 86, it said, not as a question, but as a statement. I nodded, unable to find my voice. I shook my head. It gestured for me to sit. The relief that flooded through me when I saw it was almost overwhelming. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't losing my mind. For 3 weeks I'd been questioning my own sanity, and now here was proof, standing in front of me, exactly as I remembered. The same reddish-brown hair, the same intelligent eyes, the same impossible reality. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated you, I admitted, sitting down on the same spot I'd occupied last time. It observed. Quote, 93. I thought about that. Quote, nay 4. The creature made a sound that might have been approval. Quote, not at 95. My stomach tightened. Quote, not at 96, not at, quote, not at 97, it said, settling into the same cross-legged position as before. Quote, not at 98. I pulled out my field notebook. More from habit than anything else. The creature watched me. It said gently. I admitted. It said, not unkindly. Quote 104, quote 105, I asked. Quote 106. The creature was quiet for a moment, and I realized it was choosing its words carefully. Quote 107, it said finally. Quote 108. Quote 109. I protested. Quote 109. Quote 111. The creature agreed. Quote 111. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. I thought about the political debates I'd watched, the policy discussions I'd participated in. Every environmental protection measure was weighed against immediate economic impact. Every regulation faced pushback from people worried about quarterly profits or next year's election. The creature was right, and I hated that it was right. Quote 113, I asked quietly. Quote 114. The creature leaned forward, and its eyes were sadder than I'd ever seen them. Everything that depends on those systems collapses too. And I mean everything. Food production, power generation, social stability. All of it is built on the assumption that water will keep flowing, that forests will keep growing, that ecosystems will keep functioning. When those assumptions fail, your civilization fails. And just like that, my comfortable world got smaller, darker, and infinitely more fragile. The creature spent the next 2 hours explaining what it called the cascade. Not just environmental collapse, but societal. It described how the water shortages would trigger crop failures, how crop failures would trigger food scarcity, how scarcity would trigger conflicts over resources. It laid out a timeline with horrifying specificity. The 2020s would bring unprecedented droughts. The 2030s would see mass migrations as regions became uninhabitable. The 2040s would bring conflicts that would make previous wars look small by comparison. "How can you know this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because we've survived 4 previous human civilizations," it replied, "and we've watched each one collapse when they ignored the same warnings." I felt sick, actually physically sick, like I might throw up right there on the forest floor. This wasn't just environmental disaster. This was the end of everything I knew, my children's world. My grandchildren's world, if they even lived long enough to have children of their own, I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around it. Quote, 121. Quote, Banu 2, the creature said. Quote, 3. I thought about the archaeological record, the gaps we couldn't explain, the mysteries that didn't quite fit our models of human development. I asked, it said, 12,000 years ago, before recorded history, before agriculture as we understood it, the idea that complex civilizations had existed and vanished, leaving almost no trace, was terrifying in its implications. I asked. The creature looked at me with those ancient eyes. It paused. Quote, 109, quote, 132. The word came out as barely a breath. Quote, 130, it said. Quote, 134. I put my head in my hands. This was too much, too big, too overwhelming, I said, my voice breaking. The creature said gently, plant seeds. That's what I was supposed to do. Not save the world, just plant seeds and hope some of them grew. I started having panic attacks. The first one hit me during a department meeting in December, listening to my colleagues discuss 5-year plans and long-term resource management strategies like we had all the time in the world. I had to excuse myself, locked myself in a bathroom stall, and tried to breathe through the crushing weight of what I knew. Karen noticed I wasn't sleeping. Quote, 199, she said one morning, touching my face with concern. Quote, for free. How could I explain? How could I tell her that I'd been given a preview of humanity's future by a creature that wasn't supposed to exist? That I was carrying information that could save lives but had no way to deliver it without being dismissed as insane? The panic attack had come out of nowhere. One moment I was sitting there with my coffee, listening to Janet from planning talk about projected water usage for 2015 through 2020, and the next moment I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed, my vision tunneled. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears so loud I was sure everyone else could hear it too. I mumbled something about needing the restroom and stumbled out of the conference room, made it to the bathroom, into a stall, locked the door. I sat on the toilet lid with my head between my knees, trying to remember the breathing exercises I'd learned somewhere. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. But my brain kept screaming at me. They're talking about 5 years from now like it matters, like any of this matters. In 30 years, these offices will be empty. These plans will be meaningless. Everyone in that room is going to watch the world fall apart, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. It took 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again. When I came back to the meeting, everyone glanced at me with that polite concern people show when someone's clearly not okay, but they don't want to be rude enough to ask. You all right, Marcus? My supervisor asked. Fine, I said. Just felt a bit off for a second. The lie came so easily now. I'd been practicing. At home, I was falling apart in slow motion. I'd lost 12 pounds since October. My clothes hung loose. I had dark circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Not that I wore makeup, but Karen suggested it once, which tells you how bad I looked. I'd catch her watching me with this worried expression, like she was trying to solve a puzzle, but was missing crucial pieces. "Talk to me," she said one night after dinner. Our kids were at their rooms doing homework. It was just us at the kitchen table with the remains of a meal I'd barely touched. I looked at her face, this woman I'd loved for 18 years, and I wanted so badly to tell her, to share the weight, to have someone else know, someone who might hold me and tell me it would be okay, even if it wouldn't be. I said slowly. She reached across the table and took my hand. Quote, 148 around. And I opened my mouth. The words were right there. I met something in the forest, but what came out was, quote, 149. It wasn't a complete lie. I was having anxiety. Just not for the reasons I'd implied. Karen's face softened with relief. Oh, honey, that's normal. That's actually healthy. It means you care. And yes, you should absolutely talk to someone. I'll help you find somebody good. She was so relieved it was just anxiety. Just normal, treatable, understandable anxiety about climate change, not secret meetings with cryptids predicting the end of civilization. I'd taken the easy way out again, and I hated myself for it. I tried to work within the system. I started writing reports that emphasized the urgency of watershed protection, using the strongest language I could without raising red flags. I gave presentations at conferences, trying to inject alarm into my data without explicitly saying what I knew. I wrote op-eds for local papers about the need for immediate climate action, but everything I said was filtered through the lens of acceptable scientific discourse. I couldn't say what I really knew. I couldn't reveal the source of my certainty, and I watched my warnings get filed away, noted, acknowledged, and ultimately ignored in favor of more pressing immediate concerns. The first op-ed I wrote was published in The Olympian in February 2010. I spent 3 days crafting it, trying to find the balance between urgency and credibility. Quote 151. The headline read, I laid out the data, the trends, the projections. I used phrases like, quote, 152, quote 153, quote 154. The comments section filled up within hours. Half the people called me an alarmist. The other half thanked me for speaking up but said they felt helpless to do anything about it. Nobody changed their behavior. Nobody demanded action from their representatives. The op-ed disappeared from the front page after 2 days, replaced by stories about local sports and city council meetings. At a hydrology conference in Portland that spring, I gave a presentation titled, quote 155, quote, I showed graphs, projections, worst-case scenarios. I used every bit of data I had to paint the most alarming picture I could while still being scientifically defensible. During the Q&A, a colleague from Oregon State asked, quote, 156, quote, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I knew these weren't extreme projections, that they were actually conservative, that the real timeline was worse than I could say out loud. Instead, I adjusted my glasses and said, I think it's important to consider worst-case scenarios so we can work to prevent them. Polite applause. Moved on to the next presentation, my warnings absorbed and neutralized by the machinery of academic discourse. I wrote to state legislators. I sent briefings to the governor's office. I requested meetings with anyone who would listen. And I got meetings. I sat in offices and conference rooms and explained the data to aides and policy advisors who nodded thoughtfully and took notes and promised to pass my concerns along to the appropriate committees. Nothing happened, or rather, things happened. But incrementally. A small increase in conservation funding here, a new monitoring program there, changes so minor they were essentially meaningless against the scale of what was coming. Quote 158, my supervisor told me after one meeting. Quote 159, measured, professional, not apocalyptic. That's what it took to be heard, and that's exactly why the message was being lost. The creature had been right. If I tried to tell the full truth, I'd be dismissed as a lunatic. But if I stayed within acceptable bounds of scientific communication, the truth got diluted until it was toothless. There was no middle ground where I could be both credible and honest about what I knew. I was trapped between silence and futility, and people were going to die because I couldn't figure out how to escape that trap. By 2011, my marriage was fracturing. Karen knew something was wrong, something I wasn't telling her. "You're different," she said one night. "It's like you're carrying something heavy and you won't let me help." She was right. I was carrying something impossibly heavy. But how could I tell her? I'd met with the creature 9 more times by then, always at the same location, always alone. Each meeting added to the weight, more details, more specifics, more horrifying predictions. I was living 2 lives. The public Marcus, who collected data and wrote measured reports, and the private Marcus who knew things he couldn't share. The worst part was watching her try. She'd suggest date nights, weekend getaways, couples therapy. Anything to reconnect with the man she'd married, the man who'd somehow disappeared and been replaced by this distant, distracted shell. Quote 162, she said one Friday evening. Quote 163. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing the creature's latest predictions about groundwater depletion in the Central Valley. Quote 164. Quote 165. Her voice had an edge I'd been hearing more and more lately. "The reservation's been on the calendar for 2 weeks, Marcus. I sent you 3 reminder emails. I had no memory of any of it." "I'm sorry," I said. "I've been distracted." "You're always distracted." She sat down across from me, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "You're here, but you're not here. You look at me, but you don't see me. You answer questions, but you're somewhere else entirely." "Where are you, Marcus? Where do you go when you check out like this?" "To the forest," I wanted to say. "To conversations with something that shouldn't exist, learning about the end of our world." But what came out was, quote, 171, quote, 172, she said. Quote, 173. I met with the creature every 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes more frequently if it had new information to share. I'd tell Karen I was doing extended field work, which wasn't technically a lie since I was going to monitoring stations, but I'd be gone for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Sitting in the forest, having impossible conversations while she thought I was collecting water samples. She started questioning the field work. "Why do these trips take so long now?" she asked in March. "You used to be back by early afternoon. Now you're gone until dinner." "More thorough data collection," I said. Another lie. "The department wants more comprehensive monitoring." She looked at me like she was trying to see through me. "Is there someone else?" The question hit me like a punch. "What?" "No, Karen, no, there's no one else." "Then what is it?" "Because something is happening. You're hiding something from me, and I don't know what it is, but it's destroying us." She was crying now, and I couldn't comfort her because my hands felt frozen. Useless. How could I explain that there was something else, just not what she thought? That I was spending hours with a creature, developing something that felt almost like friendship, while my actual human relationships disintegrated. "Oh, quote 181, I said, and that at least was true. Quote 182. Quote 183. She wiped her eyes. Quote 184. I almost did, right then. I almost told her everything, but then I imagined the conversation, imagined her face when I said the words, quote, 185, quote, and quote 186, quote, imagined her insisting I get help, or worse, believing me and having to carry this weight, too. Quote 187, I whispered. Quote 188. She stood up. Quote 189. She slept in the guest room that night, and the next night, and the night after that. We were still married, still living in the same house, still raising our kids together. But we were strangers now, separated by a secret I couldn't share, and she couldn't forgive. The creature had warned me this would happen. Quote 190. It had said during our fourth meeting. Quote 191. I was losing the most important person, and I still couldn't tell her why. 2013, 2014, 2015. Year after year, I watched the creature's predictions manifest with terrifying accuracy. Drought conditions that matched the timeline it had described. Salmon run failures in rivers it had specifically mentioned. Temperature increases in watersheds it had warned about. Each confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. I started keeping a private journal, documenting the parallels between what I'd been told and what was actually happening. Part of me hoped I'd find discrepancies, proof that the creature had been wrong, that the future wasn't as fixed as it had suggested. But the discrepancies never came. California's drought began in late 2011, exactly when the creature had said it would. Quote 192. It had told me during our meeting in January 2010. Quote 193. I watched the news reports with a sick feeling in my stomach, Lake Mead dropping to historic lows, California farmers leaving fields fallow, mandatory water restrictions in cities that had never imagined running dry. My colleagues discussed it as a concerning anomaly. I knew it was the beginning of the cascade. In my private journal, I wrote the date, the prediction, and the outcome. I kept it locked in a drawer in my home office. Sometimes I'd take it out late at night and read through the entries, hoping to find some place where the creature had been wrong, where reality had diverged from the prophecy. It never had. 2013. The creature had predicted that the Elwha River salmon runs would show stress even after dam removal. The returning salmon will find the river changed in ways beyond the dams, it had said. Temperature, chemistry, flow patterns. The ecosystem memory has been disrupted. That fall, despite the successful dam removal project that everyone celebrated, the salmon returns were disappointing. My colleagues attributed it to transition periods and natural variation. I knew better. 2014. Snowpack in the Cascades hit record lows. The creature had given me the number 4 years earlier. 68% below average in the winter of 2013 to 2014. The actual measurement came in at 67% below average. I was off by 1 percentage point. 1. I brought this up during our meeting that spring. How? I asked. How can you predict with that level of accuracy? We don't predict, the creature said. We recognize patterns. We've watched your species' relationship with water for thousands of years. The signs have always been clear to those willing to see them. Your scientists see them too, Marcus. They just don't want to believe what the signs are showing. But specific numbers, I pressed. Exact percentages. Exact years. That's not pattern recognition. That's something else. The creature was quiet for a long moment. Our understanding of time is different from yours, it said finally. We live longer. We remember longer. We see the arc of things in ways your short lives don't allow. What seems like prediction to you is simply observation to us. 2015 brought another confirmation. The Yakima Basin water allocations dropped exactly as the creature had outlined. Farmers received 34% of their normal allocation. The creature had said 30 to 35%. Again, terrifyingly accurate. I started having dreams about the journal being discovered, Karen finding it, or my kids or a colleague. Having to explain why I had pages and pages of environmental predictions written in my handwriting, dated years before the events occurred, with notes like, told to me by source and predicted October 2009. You're documenting it all, the creature observed during a meeting in late 2015. Why? Because someone needs to know this wasn't random, I said. If the rest of the predictions come true, if civilization does collapse, someone needs to understand it was preventable, that we were warned. And you think your journal will survive what's coming? It sounded almost sad. Probably not, I admitted. But I have to try. I have to do something with this information besides just carry it. The creature nodded slowly. You're the only human I've ever told, it said. In all my years, across all my encounters with your kind, you're the only one I trusted with the full truth. That should have felt like an honor. Instead, it felt like a sentence, because I was watching everything the creature predicted come true year after year, and I still couldn't convince anyone it mattered. September 2017, 8 years after our first meeting. I'd been meeting with the creature roughly every 6 weeks, always at the same location. We'd developed something that felt almost like a relationship, though I still didn't know what to call it. Teacher and student, prophet and witness. That day, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. The creature looked at me with those impossibly intelligent eyes. It replied, quote, 2:18. Then it leaned forward. Quote 2:19. I was 51 years old. I'd been carrying this secret for 8 years. My marriage had ended in divorce 2 years earlier. Karen had finally given up trying to reach the person I'd become. My kids, now teenagers, visited on weekends and holidays, polite but distant. I'd sacrificed everything for these meetings, for this knowledge, and I still didn't understand what I was supposed to do with it, I said, hearing the bitterness in my voice. Quote 2:21. The creature was quiet for a moment. In 8 years, I'd learned to read its silences. This one felt contemplative, maybe even sad. The first time we met, it said finally, you asked why the water was changing before you even knew I was there. You stood in this forest wondering why the patterns didn't make sense, why the data troubled you. Most humans in your position would have filed their reports and moved on. You stayed curious. You stayed concerned. Curiosity doesn't stop civilizations from collapsing, I said. No, it agreed, but it's where all change begins. And you're still asking why, even now, even after 8 years of carrying this weight. That's rare, Marcus. Most humans I've observed eventually stop asking. They accept what they're told, or they retreat into denial, or they become paralyzed by hopelessness. You're still fighting to understand. I thought about the journal in my desk drawer. Hundreds of pages now. Predictions and outcomes, observations and reflections. 8 years of documentation that I couldn't show anyone without being dismissed as delusional, the creature said. 29. 30. I said. The creature replied. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe it. But I'd spent 8 years watching my warnings get absorbed and neutralized by the system. I've tried, I said, and my voice broke. I've tried so hard to make people understand, and nobody listens. Or they listen, but they don't change anything. They nod and thank me and go right back to whatever they were doing before. The creature reached out then, something it had never done before, placed one massive hand on my shoulder. The gesture was gentle, careful, aware of the strength behind it. I know, it said quietly. I've watched you try. I've watched you sacrifice your marriage, your peace, your happiness, all in service of a message most people don't want to hear. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I gave you this burden. That's when I started crying. Just sat there in the forest with a Bigfoot's hand on my shoulder and cried like I hadn't cried in years. For everything I'd lost, for everything we were going to lose. For the terrible loneliness of knowing and not being believed. What do I do? I whispered. What do I do with all of this? You keep going, it said. You keep asking why, and when the time is right, you tell the whole truth, not the sanitized version, the real truth. Let people decide what to do with it. March 2024, 15 years after our first conversation. I'm 58 now, and the creature looks exactly as it did that first day. It doesn't seem to age the way humans do. This will be our last meeting, it said, and my chest tightened. I'd grown dependent on these encounters, on the confirmation that I wasn't insane, that what I'd experienced was real. I asked. Quote 244, it replied. Quote 224, February 5. The words hit me harder than I expected. These meetings had become the anchor of my life. Every 6 to 8 weeks, I'd hike to this spot, sit with this impossible being, and for a few hours feel less alone with the burden I carried. Now that was ending. "I don't know how to do this without you," I said. And I wasn't ashamed of the admission. Quote 247. Quote 248, the creature said. Quote 249. It was true. The journal in my desk had grown thick with entries, each year bringing new confirmations. The western United States was in the middle of the worst drought in 1,200 years. Lake Mead and Lake Powell were at critically low levels. The Colorado River was failing. Everything the creature had predicted 15 years ago was manifesting. We were only 25 years into the 40-year timeline. Quote 250. The creature continued. Quote 291. Quote of 22, I said. Quote did command it for that. He quoted at time of 40. It agreed, simply. Quote of 255. I looked at this being I'd spent 15 years knowing but still barely understood. Why did you really choose me? I asked. The real reason. The creature was quiet for a long moment. Because I was lonely too, it said finally. My kind, we're disappearing. There are so few of us left. And I thought, maybe if I could make one human truly understand, truly see what's coming, maybe that would matter. Maybe that connection would mean something, even if it didn't change the outcome. The honesty of that admission took my breath away. All this time, I'd thought I was the one carrying the burden, but the creature had been carrying its own, the loneliness of being one of the last, the weight of watching civilizations fall over and over, the isolation of knowing truths that nobody wanted to hear. I asked. Quote 261. Quote 262. It said, and there was something gentle in its voice. I felt tears on my face. The sun was starting to set through the trees. We'd been sitting here for hours and I hadn't even noticed. I asked. It said. Standing up felt like accepting the end of something I wasn't ready to lose. But the creature was right. I didn't need these meetings anymore. I needed to decide what to do with everything I'd learned. Thank you, I said, for trusting me. For 15 years of truths I couldn't have found anywhere else. The creature stood too, towering over me one last time. Tell the story, Marcus, all of it. Let people think what they want, but tell the truth. Then it turned and walked into the forest, and I watched until the shadows swallowed it completely. I stood there alone as darkness fell, understanding that the real test was just beginning. Standing there in the forest, facing the creature for what would be the last time, I understood what it was really asking. It was giving me permission. Permission to go public, to tell the impossible truth, to risk everything I'd built, my reputation, my career, my credibility, for a chance to deliver the warning in its full, unfiltered form. Quote 233. I said slowly, quote 234. The creature nodded. Quote 275. I thought about my journal. 15 years of entries. Predictions written in 2009 that had come true in 2013, 2015, 2020. Specific numbers, exact timelines. Detailed descriptions of environmental changes that I'd documented before they happened. Any reasonable person reading that journal would have questions. How did I know? Where did this information come from? And when I told them the source, any credibility the predictions might have given me would evaporate instantly. I've already lost so much, I said. My marriage ended because of the secrets I kept. My kids barely know me. I've alienated colleagues by being too alarmist. My career is stalled because I keep pushing warnings nobody wants to hear. What more can I sacrifice? Your comfort, the creature said. Your safety. Your ability to live a quiet life. If you tell this story, you'll become a target. For mockery, for conspiracy theorists, for people who need you to be wrong because accepting you're right would be too terrifying. You'll never have peace again. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. And if I don't tell it, if I just keep going the way I have been, then you'll watch everything I predicted come true while knowing you held back the full truth. You'll wonder for the rest of your life if telling the complete story might have made a difference. That's its own kind of torture, Marcus. Trust me. I know, the creature was right. I'd been torturing myself for 15 years already, trying to walk the line between credibility and honesty. Every measured report I wrote felt like a betrayal of what I really knew. Every sanitized presentation felt like I was participating in the very denial I was trying to combat. I asked. The creature agreed. I thought about my children. Emily was 32 now. My son was 29. They'd have to live through the worst of what was coming. The 2030s, the 2040s, the mass migrations, the resource conflicts, the unraveling of the systems they'd built their lives around. What would I tell them when they asked why nobody warned them? How could I look them in the eye, knowing I'd had specific, detailed warnings and kept them filtered and diluted because I was afraid of being mocked? I don't know if I'm brave enough, I admitted. Bravery isn't about not being afraid, the creature said. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. You've been brave for 15 years, Marcus, meeting with me when you didn't know if I'd hurt you, keeping this secret when it was destroying your marriage, continuing to warn people even when nobody listened. You're braver than you think. I looked up at this being that had become the most important relationship in my life. Will anyone believe me? Some will, it said. Maybe not many, maybe not enough, but some. And those some might be the seeds that grow into something larger. You won't live to see if they do, but they might grow anyway. The sun had set completely now. I should have been hiking back to my truck in the dark, but I couldn't make myself move. Because once I left this spot, once I really accepted that this was our last meeting, I'd have to decide. Tell the truth and face the consequences, or keep the secret and live with the regret. Neither choice was good, but one of them was honest, and after 15 years of lies, partial truths, and carefully worded warnings, maybe honesty was worth the cost. I didn't tell anyone that day, or the next week, or the next month. I'm telling you now, whoever you are, watching this video. And I know exactly how it sounds. I know the comments will be full of skepticism, mockery, demands for proof I don't have. But I've spent 15 years watching every single prediction come true. The watersheds are collapsing, the salmon are disappearing, the droughts are intensifying, and we're running out of time. The creature said we have 40 years from 2009. That means we have 25 years left. Maybe less. I don't know if telling this story will change anything. I don't know if anyone will believe me. But I finally understand what the creature was trying to teach me all along. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be proven. It just needs to be spoken. It's been 8 months since that last meeting in the forest. 8 months of sitting with the decision, wrestling with it, trying to find the courage to do what I knew I needed to do. I'm 58 years old. I've spent 15 years, more than a quarter of my life, carrying this secret. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of filtering the truth, of choosing my words carefully, of watching people dismiss warnings they desperately need to hear. So I'm done filtering. I'm done being careful. This is what happened. In October 2009, I met a Bigfoot in the Olympic National Forest. It spoke to me in perfect English. It told me humanity had 40 years before our ecological systems would collapse beyond recovery. It gave me specific predictions, exact timelines, detailed warnings about what was coming. And for 15 years, I watched those predictions come true with terrifying accuracy. You can believe that or not. You can call me crazy, delusional, a liar seeking attention. I've made peace with that. Because the predictions don't stop being true just because you don't believe their source. The data I collected over 2 decades as a hydrologist doesn't become invalid because I'm telling you where I learned to interpret it. The droughts, the salmon failures, the groundwater depletion, the forest die-offs, they're all happening exactly as I was told they would. I have my journal. 15 years of entries. I'm not going to show it to you because it wouldn't matter. You'd say I wrote it all recently, backdated it, fabricated the whole thing. There's no way to prove when I wrote those predictions. No way to prove I didn't just use publicly available climate data and pretend I got it from an impossible source. I understand that. I accept that. But I'm telling you anyway, because somewhere out there, someone might hear this story and start asking the questions that matter. Why are the watersheds failing? Why are the patterns matching what scientists predicted decades ago but nobody acted on? Why do we keep waiting for certainty before we're willing to change? My daughter called me last week. We've been rebuilding our relationship slowly since the divorce. She's thinking about having children. Is it irresponsible? She asked me. Bringing kids into this world right now with everything that's happening? I thought about the creature's timeline. 25 years left. Her children, if she has them, would be 25 years old when the real collapse begins. Old enough to understand what they're losing. Young enough that it should have been their whole future ahead of them. I don't know, I told her honestly. I don't know what's responsible anymore. What I wanted to say was, I tried to warn people. For 15 years, I tried. I wrote reports and gave presentations and published op-eds and briefed legislators. I did everything I could within the system, and it wasn't enough. The system is designed to avoid disruption, to maintain comfort, to preserve the status quo. And the status quo is killing us. Maybe telling this story will make a difference. Maybe someone watching this will decide to ask why, to dig deeper, to demand action, instead of waiting for more studies and more reports and more carefully worded warnings that never lead to change. Maybe this video will plant a seed that grows into something that matters, or maybe it won't. Maybe I'll just become another conspiracy theory, another cautionary tale about what happens when scientists lose their grip on reality. Maybe this will be the final thing that destroys what's left of my credibility in my career. But I made a promise to a friend. A friend who watched 4 human civilizations collapse and still had enough hope to try warning a 5th. A friend who trusted me with truths I couldn't prove and knowledge I couldn't share. A friend who asked me, at the very end, to tell the whole story. So this is me telling it. This is me breaking every rule I've followed for 15 years. This is me choosing honesty over safety, truth over comfort, speaking over silence. We have 25 years, maybe less. The creature was never wrong before. What we do at that time is up to us.